Okay, so welcome back to another Wednesday virtual tasting with Binny's. I am Pat from the Whiskey Hotline, joined by Brett and Joe as usual. We have two special guests tonight. One we are waiting on a bit. First of all, Bailey Pryor, owner and founder of the Real McCoy rum brand. We will be joined by Richard Seale, owner and master distiller at the Foursquare Distillery, who makes these wonderful rums for Mr. Pryor. He texted and said he had an issue at the distillery, so let's hope nothing's burning to the ground, and we'll see him shortly here, hopefully. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us for rum. I know we normally have whiskey on Wednesday, but it's summertime, and we felt like drinking rum this week. So, Bailey, thank you for joining us today. You want to give a little breakdown of how you got into the rum business and kind of the founding of this brand?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I've been producing films for a long time. And I was doing a documentary film for PBS about Bill McCoy and the rum runners of the Prohibition era. And so McCoy, I thought, was a really fascinating character because he's the only name you know from Prohibition who wasn't a psychopathic murderer, right? Like Al Capone and Babyface Nelson and Machine Gun Kelly and all these guys running around with Tommy guns killing people. And then there was the guy named Bill McCoy who got nicknamed the Real McCoy because he refused to break the law and refused to rip off his customers by adulterating the rum that he was bringing in. And so he actually was the first guy to fill up a boat full of rum in January of 1920 down in the Caribbean, sailed it up to New York City, and stayed 3 miles offshore, within sight of the Statue of Liberty. And that was international waters back then, so he wasn't breaking the law, and there was nothing the Coast Guard could do. So if he stayed outside of the Coast Guard's light ship that was always stationed out there back then, he wasn't breaking the law. And he waved down fishermen and said, hey, tell all your friends I've got rum out here. And so the very first night that he did this, about 50 boats showed up, and it was the very evening that Prohibition began. So he had a huge party out there on that very first night, and then every month he would come back to Rum Row with another boatload of alcohol. And he never, he wasn't a violent guy, and he never wasn't in the mob and didn't do all these things that you read about during Prohibition. He just was very good at transporting alcohol and then not adulterating it. So he got known as the Real McCoy. And I just thought that was a fascinating story. And I went and pitched it at the network. I'd been, doing films for them for years. I used to own a ski and snowboard movie company. If any of you guys are into snowboarding and skiing, it's called Warren Miller Films. We'd make all these great action films. And so I went to PBS and started pitching them on this idea. And they said, well, we're PBS. We don't do movies about alcohol. And I said, come on, man, it's a great story, to the president. And so he didn't want to do it. So I just decided I really liked the idea and I'm going to make it anyway. So I went for it. And it took me about 5 years. I did it all with my own money. I had to do all the jobs because I didn't have the budget. And so I finished the movie, brought it back to the network and showed it to them. And they loved it and put it on the air. And about 6 months later, I got a letter in the mail from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences saying, you've been nominated for 5 Emmy Awards for writing and directing and editing and cinematography and Best Picture, which I had to do all those jobs because I didn't have the money to hire anybody else. And I ended up going to the Emmys with my lovely wife, Jennifer, and we won all 5 Emmys. It was amazing. So we had this amazing start to this whole storyline. Yeah, it was incredible. And that's about the time that we were talking about starting a rum company. And it just fascinated me, this whole subject. And since I write and direct all of my films, I do all my own research. I just started getting completely enamored with distillation, fermentation, the techniques, the processes. And I understood just enough about organic chemistry to be dangerous. So it was very interesting to me. And I found Richard Seale actually through a really bizarre way. I found all the photographs that I used in the movie, and some of which were taken by Bill McCoy and his crew on the deck of their ship in the 1920s. And in some of the barrels, you can see custom stamps painted on the barrels that said Barbados rum. So that's how I knew Bill McCoy got his rum from Barbados. So Jennifer and I flew down there and met with the head of the National Archive and showed her the photographs. And we said, well, which distillery would this have been? And they said, well, we have no idea. That was just a custom stamp. So we can't tell from the barrel. But our guess is it was probably the Seale family who owned Foursquare Distillery, because they were in business in the 1920s. And I thought it might have been Mount Gay. And I called up the owner of Mount Gay at the time, Frank Ward, and he agreed to meet with me. And I showed him the pictures. He said, it definitely wasn't us. We didn't start exporting until 1957. I think it might be the Seale family. So I went and met with Richard, and he loved the idea. And he agreed to work with me and make rum for me. And it was the first real collaboration, I think, that he and his family had done in a long time. And we've been great friends, and I've been learning from Richard now for the past 10 years. It's absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly hurt that it turns out your historical brand, it was getting rum from what is now considered maybe the best rum distillery in the world. So kind of works out quickly there.
Yeah, we don't really know though, you know, but yeah, that's the case. Yeah.
So how many years have we had Real McCoy now? It's got to be close to 10 or something, right?
Yeah, Richard and I started 10 years ago. We didn't start selling till 2013, so we're in our 7th year now of selling. So, but we met, I think it was 2009 or so, and started working together at that time. And it was a lot of fun, and it's been fascinating this whole time. And now, you know, the brand has really grown, and as Richard's recognition in the industry also has really grown, we're now selling in all 50 states in the U.S. and about 10 countries overseas. And so people who are really into high quality, unadulterated spirits really have learned to start to respect rum in this sector, you know, and it's a small portion of the beverage alcohol business overall, but it's important because, you know, the rum sector has always been very fun and has always had lots of sort of party in college kind of modes about it. Everybody remembers drinking too much rum back in college or whenever, and so we all have those things about it. But the thing that I found fascinating about rum was that the conversation on rum was completely irrelevant to what was in the glass, right? We talk about rum in terms of light and dark, and you know, have you ever heard of a dark whiskey? How about the light cognac? You know, no one else talks about their spirit that way. Mm-hmm. So there was room to talk about aging and adulteration and traditions and things like that people just weren't talking about. And we've been doing this for a long time, talking about this stuff, and the industry has kind of shifted over to that discussion, which is really great. And it was really spearheaded by Richard, I think. And
yeah.
For sure.
We have a long running joke where it's finally hit. So I just looked up a piece of trivia. We started working with you guys very early in 2015. And I think that you actually met with Michael, owner of the company, and had a discussion first. Yep. And we got you launched, and it was really one of the first rum brands that we would have dealt with. So our joke is this is about the 7th annual Summer of Rum. It's just, this is the year that rum is going to take off. But slowly but surely what's missed from, and I remember the time when Michael said, listen, I met with this guy named Bailey. He's got this great brand. We should talk about it. There's interesting, or he said, I don't really know a lot. So this is what I heard. What do you think? And I'm like, well, it's all legit. I mean, this is, let's try. The rums are fantastic, but you're right there. For those of us who have been in it from the beginning, you know, and how much different have you found it now telling that story than when you started this and when you started selling commercially in 2013, and people's ability to understand, you know, the difference in light and dark. And now we can have conversations about ester levels in rums, which would have been unheard of even 2 years ago, let alone 10.
That's right.
So much of that too is that people's introduction to sipping rums, what a lot of people would consider, I love smooth sipping rums, are just absolutely loaded with sugar on the back end with additional sugar. Yes. And that's something that Richard's very much against, and that comes through, you know, not in this brand either. So how do you win those people over when they try it? It's still a sweet rum, but it doesn't have 44 grams of sugar per bottle or something like some of those other ones out there.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the big thing. I think, you know, in the early days for me, 2013, 14, 15, there was no conversation about tradition or unadulterated. We were just talking about mythical sea monsters and aliens and cannons and pirates. And that's where we went. So just to go from that to where we are today has been an absolute miracle, and that we've made it that far, that fast, which I think is really great. But now it's a real conversation, and it's a global conversation. In fact, I had never planned on bringing the rum to Europe, and within the first year, I was getting email after email after email from all these importers and liquor store chains and things like that over in Europe saying, we want this rum, we want this rum. And it just turned into this really great thing to start slowly moving in that direction as well. And they had a much more sophisticated rum connoisseur in Europe than we had in the United States at that time. There were many more people that knew a lot more about rum and the traditions. And I would go to the Berlin Rum Festival in 2000. 15, and people would walk up to me and say, "Are you doing a secondary malolactic fermentation?" You know, I was like, wow. They didn't ask me about sea monsters. You know, like it was really a really big difference in terms of how the products were marketed. But today, very sophisticated customers in the U.S. You have collectors here now. I think we're on the verge of people starting to really collect and auction and have real value built into rare rums that are of high quality. And it's just for the person trying to learn more about rum, the technique is to learn the difference between aged and unaged rum and modified versus unmodified. Those are the simple classifications in rum today. And if you that info, you'll learn a lot.
Yeah, we're just now finally getting traction, and we have been trying to do this for a long time. You guys were certainly a great boon in giving us a platform in which to start to tell the story, because it was, you know, in 2013, for a lot of people, it was Bacardi and everything else, or Bacardi and Captain Morgan and everything else. And we had a lot of the traditional, what you would have discovered when you went over there, we kind of knew was going on, because you would get rum cask aged or rum cask finished scotches, because it turns out that there was some absurd percentage of the rum sold in the UK, 80 or 90%, was actually not original bottlings, but were merchant bottlings, because all the merchants would buy barrels from everybody. It was great for the rum producers because they didn't have to build a brand. They just had to sell barrels. It was up to Cadden Heads and, you know, and all of those different independent bottlers, right? Gordon and MacPhail did a lot of this. Very traditional Scotch bottlers who were buying casks and bottling everything. You know, the La Maison de Whiskey had that as a side program now, which is now La Maison Velier. It's what they're doing, is a side program of a program La Maison de Whiskey in Paris was running. So that was a big part of the catch up. And you're right, these being great bridges. So what else has captured your mind now that you've gone down the rabbit hole of rum? What else has captured your mind going forward?
Well, there's kind of two things. You know, one is a conversation that my wife Jennifer and I have been having for years about transparency and alcohol labeling. I have a severe allergy to sulfites, so if I drink like certain glasses of wine, it just takes me one sip and I get completely like histamine reaction. I get all flush and I break out in a little bit of a rash, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's just a condition that I have. And so a couple of years ago, I had a very bad reaction to some alcohol that made it so I actually almost stopped breathing. It was kind of terrifying. And so we realized like it's really strange that you can buy any form of prepared foods, whether it's a can of soda or a jug of juice or a box of cereal or some, you know, breakfast sausages. They all have regulation on the back label that says, you know, ingredients and serving facts, and it discloses to the consumer what's in this packaging. But with beverage alcohol, there's none of that. Like, there's never been that. So you don't know what's in your wines, your beers, your spirits. And there are quite a bit of things that people put into the products depending on how industrialized those products are. So, you know, we have vegetarians out there who are drinking wine and it's not being disclosed to them that many winemakers use animal products as a clarifying agent. They take up dried up intestines of chickens and fish and pulverize it into a powder, and they use that to clear the liquid. So if it's a cloudy wine and they don't want it to look cloudy, they'll put this clarifying agent. Well, that's a meat product, and that doesn't get disclosed to vegetarians who think they're doing well by just drinking this nice wine. So we think like these kinds of things should be disclosed, especially like sulfites and stuff like that. So we spent, at Jennifer's, stimulation, you know, her pushing us to do this, we have just become the first beverage alcohol in America, and I think possibly the world, to list ingredients and serving facts on the back label. That's never been done before in the United States, as far as we know. And because we have no additives in real McCoy, our ingredients are rum and Barbados spring water. We were tested by third-party agencies and given certifications that were gluten-free and vegan-friendly. But more importantly, you're seeing on the back like how many carbs and calories and fat there is. You know, so you know, like if you do like 2 servings of this, it's less carbs, calories, and fat than a single beer. So this is allowing you to make informed decisions about what it is that you might like. You know, the seltzer, the hard seltzer craze is really awesome because people are starting to really indicate, like, I want an option that is less, or there's a little more healthy. Not that any alcohol is healthy for you, but it's a little more healthy for you because it doesn't have a lot of carbs and calories and things like that. Maybe not as much as beer, but essentially, you know, those are vodkas blended with bubbling water and some flavors. And so it's a very simple recipe. And so just getting that information is hugely empowering to consumers. And we think it's really important. And this is on our limited edition 12 year that's coming out this month, actually. So this is 12 years. It's been blended from 12 years in ex-bourbon casks with 12 years in virgin oak. So it's absolutely beautiful. And this is 50% alcohol. So the ABV is very high. And I approached Richard about this last year because I told him I wanted to have a 100 proof expression of real McCoy for the 100th anniversary of Prohibition this year. And so he started working on this quite a long time ago and brought it up to me now. And so it's been fabulous and we're really excited about it. And you guys, I believe, are about to get a whole bunch of it.
Yeah, is this the extension? Well, too, and you guys are set for the UK because they've started doing that. That's been a big debate, and they've started doing nutrition labels, I believe, for sure in the UK, and it's going to be an EU thing as well, because they were more concerned about revealing at first the alcohol, like the true effects of the alcohol from a health perspective, but it's sort of evolved into a disclosure of all nutritional facts to cause a breakdown. But is this so this 12-year virgin oak, is this a natural extension of the 10-year that was released a couple of years ago? So 14, this is just the extension. Okay.
Yeah. So this is 2 years later on the 10-year that you used to have that
right.
A couple years ago, but it's also much higher ABV. We're at 50% instead of 46. Right. And of course, every blend is different. The blends are right. unique, as you know, with Richard, he's doing these blends from different barrels. And I don't know how familiar you are with the process, but he's not on yet. So obviously having issues at the distillery right now, but I can give you some background on this. His process is to utilize the same raw materials for everything that he's doing. So the same source of molasses or sources of molasses that he works with are consistent throughout his process. He then goes through the fermentation process in a consistent way. And then he has two different stills. So one still is a 1,750 liter copper pot still, which is a double retort still. It's got two little chambers connected to it. And that produces a very heavy flavor profile spirit because pot stills are very inefficient at extracting the volatile esters, or the volatiles, the volatile alcohols. And he also has a twin column coffee still, which is technology developed by Enos Coffee in the 1870s. And that twin column coffee still has a whole bunch of plates in it, and it's very efficient at extracting alcohol. So he gets a very light flavor profile, but that device is not capable of making neutral spirit. So he can't make a neutral spirit, he can't make a vodka, but he can make a definitely recognizable, onoleptic recognizable rum. And so he takes the light flavor profile from the twin column coffee still, the heavy flavor profile from the pot still, and he blends them in different percentages in barrels before aging. So he puts the barrel down, he does these blends where they'll be like heavy blend, meaning more pot still, and there's a light blend, meaning less pot still, more coffee still. And so he'll have these different variations of blends, and he'll put those in barrels and then age those over time. And this is kind of the tradition of, and sort of the secret of how blended Barbados rums are made. And this is what makes rum different from Barbados than from Jamaica, for example. The Jamaicans really lean heavily traditionally on the pot still. They didn't adopt the technology of the column still till much, much later than many of the other islands, I think all of the other islands. And so they come out with these big, heavy pot still. If you ever had Hampton or some of the worthy parks, big, heavy pot still products that are because their double retort pot stills are super funky, and that's the difference between those devices. So Richard does these blends, as is the tradition in Barbados, and then he'll take those blends that have been aged for X number of years in various types of wood. And then he'll make his various expressions. So when you try all of the different products that Richard tastes, nothing is the same. It's not like he just made one type of rum and put different labels on the bottles, which does happen at some distilleries. he doesn't do it like that. He's got these different blend percentages. And so Real McCoy will be one sector of that, and Dorley's will be another sector, and the exceptional cask, the Foursquare exceptional cask series will be a different sector. And he'll play with different wood, which can, you can have port and Zinfandel and sherry and Madeira or virgin oak. So the possibilities are infinite when you then also add, the effect of alcohol, of ABV, percentage of alcohol in the blend. And now he's also doing really interesting new things. Oh, there's Richard.
Hey, he's here.
There he is. And I'll let him talk for himself.
Richard, you need to unmute.
Background.
Oh, hang on.
Unmute again. Richard, you need to. There you go.
Oh, nope, I'm clicking it right after somebody else's. Sorry. There we go. Maybe.
Okay, only one person. Richard, you do the unmute. There we go.
Hey.
Yahtzee.
Yes,
Hey.
don't touch it again.
Yeah, exactly.
Is everything okay?
So you're not.
Yes. We had a little electrical problem, and it was a bit of a catastrophe, but it's all sorted. We were changing UPSs on all the instruments, and the guys did a major boo-boo and shut everything down.
Ooh.
And we thought for a second everything was destroyed, and we turned out it was just one of our 24-volt supplies. So we slowly brought everything back up, and luckily on that supply was just a fuse, and so everything's back up. Well, they'll call me if some little thing is not up, but so one thing that I explained running a distillery is very much analogous to a pilot flying one of these modern planes. It's basically mostly extremely peaceful, very slow, nothing much happens, and then there are moments of sheer absolute terror.
Yeah, you make your money
with working with Brett Pontani on a personal.
Yeah. You make your money when things go south.
Yeah, so we just had one of those moments of absolute terror, and we've just made a safe landing. So,
oh, that's great. Glad to hear it.
The celebratory cigar. So, yeah. Richard, we were just starting to get into the nuts and bolts of the rum making process here, and what can't be not talked about when we talk rums made at your distillery is the blend of pot and column stilled rums that go into pretty much everything you do, right? And we were talking about how they produce two very differing flavor profiles. Is this something that I'm sure as the blender, you can taste this immediately off the bat. You can pick up any rum blind and tell whether this was column or pot distilled. But for the audience, I would assume so. I mean, I'd be disappointed if you can't. I'll put it that way. Is there a dead giveaway for you personally that you're looking for when you're looking for a heavier flavored rum, where it's like this is going to be something that's going to go into maybe a more aggressive oak, like the virgin oak from the Real McCoy limited releases? What kind of flavor profile off the distillate are you looking for those kind of future?
Well, it is fair to say that distillate is driven, or choice of oak is driven, or can be related heavily to distillate. That's absolutely fair. And as well as time. So, for example, if I'm making a particular blend and I'm putting it away, if I actually illustrate it very well with Real McCoy 3 versus Real McCoy 12. So Real McCoy 3 is driven by the actual profile of the distillate, which is made as a blend, is driven heavily by the fact that you're going to drink it at 3 years old, and two, we're going to age it in very old ex-bourbon casks. So these are casks that have been seasoned with rum for years and years and years, and that provides a beautiful vessel for making this sort of this balance between having a rum that's flavorful, but also a rum that's going to appeal to, cocktail artists. And the thing about a cocktail artist is they will work with a set of spirits, and they're always trading off sort of flavor and flexibility. So you can give them something, super intense, like, like a clarion or something, and they can use it, but what they can use it for is very narrow. And then you can give them something like a, dare I mention, Bacardi, but you can sort of use a Bacardi in everything. And so obviously with Real McCoy 3, we're going to strike a balance somewhere in the middle there. And so the type of distillate that goes in is based on those barrels and based on the fact it's going to be 3 years old. So the 12-year-old distillate now is totally different because it's going to be based on, I couldn't honestly say that we set out, oh yes, it's going to be best at exactly 12 years old, but it's going to be based on, look, we're going to drink this much older. So therefore we can take, maybe lack of a better word, risk. So in other words, you're going to have some more heavier distillates in there. You're going to have some more rougher edges in there that you hope are going to blossom and become, because well, I'm not going to drink this much before sort of 8 years old. So the type of distillate that turns up in a Real McCoy 12, we don't sort of drink much before about 8 years old. And then of course it can go better and better. So that's very much, and of course how those distillates are created are driven by the pot and column thing. And let me explain the pot and column thing a little better, maybe next, because I think it's a little more confusing in the context of sort of the American environment. Because of course you're used to American whiskey, and American whiskey has, it comes from a column. So the thing to realize is that we use pot stills because we're very old rum making country. So, rum making was bigger earlier than, single malt Scotch whiskey. So back in the 17th century, we were making loads and loads of pot still rum when single malt Scotch whiskey was in its infancy. Ireland was bigger then. And we made it all in pot stills. So American whiskey is a reflection of the fact that American whiskey, as you know, was born sort of about 1830s on. It really blossomed. So they used the newfangled technology of the time. The column still, much more efficient. Mm-hmm. But the column still that they use in American whiskey is what we would call a low rectification column still. So it doesn't, it's very different to the type of column still we use. So what happened with us now is when the column still was developed or became very popular, late 19th century, it's very controversial in the Scotch whiskey world, it's very controversial in the rum world, but it made its way in. And what it did is it never swapped one for the other. In fact, it was the key behind the birth of the greatest, what I call the greatest, most successful spirit ever created, which is blended Scotch whiskey. It was the foundation of all those blenders, Mr. Dewar's and Mr. Ballantyne's and Mr. Teacher's and all that, creating this. And they were balancing the single malt 100% pot still spirit with not a spirit to mimic that, which would be more what the American single column low rectification is, but with this lighter column spirit to balance and create something. Well, let's put it this way: without the column still, it would be vastly more difficult to make something like Real McCoy 3 because you want something light and palatable and young. So for very basic obviousness, Real McCoy 3 has more column still spirit in it vis-a-vis Real McCoy 12. And so that success of blended Scotch whiskey, and in fact it may have been learned the other way around, it's from the rum people, but in any case, this is what happened at the turn of the century. We made these blended rums. One of the things, like blended Scotch whiskey, but one of the things that's very different about the rum world, and this is why we write on the label single blended rum, because in Scotch whiskey, blended, which has a very different meaning in America, blended means, the pot and the column. It means the pot of the single malt and the column of the grain whiskey. Well, blended for us means the same thing because, we have this analogous heritage of traditionally using pot stills, and in comes the column still with this lighter spirit. And so but the difference with rum is that whereas the blenders were blending from different distilleries, one of the things that happened in rum is that we put column stills next to the pot stills at the same distillery. So this is very common in rum. I mean, you go to Appleton, they have pot and column still. You go to Mangay, they have pot and column still. You go to Demerara, they have pot and column still. You go to St. Lucia, they have pot and column still. So more or less all of the blended rum makers actually have both. So then that creates the situation of single blended, but it also creates the situation of a distillery brand that's blended. So in the whiskey world, you have a Scotch whiskey, a distillery brand, it's going to be 100% pot still. If it's a distillery brand, and an American whiskey, if it's a distillery brand, it's going to be 100% column still typically. Whereas in rum, you get this blend. So the two spirits are very different and intended to be very different. And that's very important to realize. You're not trying to mimic one with the other. And one of the key differences really with a good column spirit, a good light column spirit, is it really just takes out some of those really heavy, what the Scots would call faints. I'm not too sure what the American distillers call it, but that really sort of heavy fusely character. And so one of the things about the column spirit compared to pot spirit, it has a beautiful aroma and nose, but it's a lot lighter on the palate. And that can be very pleasant, and it can be very sweet and just very. So the other thing that the blenders do just related to this, and this is kind of the sort of the whole cleverness of blending, is what they discovered is that you could take this heavy pot still spirit, and it has this lovely quality called persistence. And so what that means is you take this heavy quality, this beautiful pot still spirit, and you add a bit of column spirit to it, and it doesn't seem to dilute it very much. The flavor persists. So you get this almost sort of, it looks magical, but it's not magical. You sort of add the column spirit to the pot still spirit, and it doesn't, it's almost a synergistic sort of combination of flavor, and it's almost like an extension of the distiller's faints cuts, because you can then, by doing that, make it maybe a sort of a less fusely, less oily spirit, and then that's why you can say, okay, well, I'm going to make a little lighter one and make a beautiful real McCoy 3, or I'm going to a little more heavier, a little more rough, not let the column spirit do some of its magic with a heavier spirit, and just let the age do the magic. So you have that gamut that you can run, which of course was so exploited with blended Scotch whiskey, because blended Scotch whiskey allowed, became this global phenomenon, because it was sort of this beautiful balance between sort of quality, flavor, approachability, palatability. One of the things I think rum now has this massive advantage is that the blended Scotch whiskey has kind of gone down, because the column part's gone too generic. It's gone too industrial. Right. It's gone too, whereas rum, we all have our own column stills. So we pay as much attention to the uniqueness and character of our column still as we do to the pot still.
Well, you can control other factors as well, because if you think you're working with a sugar-based material that can come in many different forms when you start to ferment it for your purposes, versus one in the Scotch world, I mean, you're dealing with typically one or a couple of grains, right, that you're running through, and they're really trying to get one.
Yes. So
they're trying to get a base. They're trying to get one very, very basic, non-fainty piece.
Correct. And the great illustration of this. So today, yes, we have a little. So sometimes I think you do have to realize that, people, I was having a sort of distillation discussion earlier, and it was sort of, people can turn their knobs, for lack of a better word, in different places. And kind of one of the ways I explain it, and I've had this conversation with Bailey. So, like when Bailey was sort of first came around to me, he sort of asked about yeast. I was like, what's the big deal about yeast? And he couldn't understand why I didn't get very excited about yeast. Because, of course, if you go to American whiskey distiller, yeast is incredibly important. And I must admit it's changed a little bit in Scotland, but years ago, if you went to Scotland and you asked a Scotch whiskey distiller about yeast, it's like, was it the big deal about yeast? I mean, they used to use a lot of brewer's yeast paradigm. And it's because it's not that yeast is not important, it's about where you turn your sort of your dials. And so for us, the blends and the woods are very important. But if you look, say, for example, at a place like Jamaica, which really only put in column stills in the modern era, you have this massive diversity of rum from Jamaica. And it's all done in either single or double retorts, but it's driven by fermentation recipes because they have this massive ability. So to your point, so you can have a sort of common distillation method and then drive so much of all your variants, and you can have some, I mean, extraordinary variants in rum. I mean, you could potentially have it in whiskey too, but it's common in rum. I remember one young Scottish intern sort of telling me, well, Scotch whiskey is very diverse. And I said to him, can you tell me any Scotch whiskey out there using natural fermentation? And of course, that was the end of the conversation. And that's the point, is that not only do we have the theoretical diversity, but we have the diversity in practice. So you've got everything from, pure cane juice on one side in the French islands, right through to, molasses dunder and juice mixtures over in Jamaica. So you've got this massive spectrum before we even arrive at the still.
Yeah, it's a huge variety of flavor that you can make this from. And that kind of leads us, we had a question on Facebook from Josh Coyle, who said, as a rum novice, he's curious how the country of origin affects the flavor profile versus maybe the location the barrels are aging in versus the blend, the distiller's blend going into the barrel. And if you have an opinion on which one that might affect more, but I assume that's kind of really wildly dependent.
But again, that's a different cultures. And in fact, my good friend Jeff Berry, I think, gave one of the greatest sort of explanations or answers on this. I mean, we do a lot of work talking about classification, but Jeff said, to give sort of the bigger picture to the consumer, is he said, rum's like wine. If you want to know about a rum, it's the same way that you want to know about a particular wine. You can call them red and white, like we call rum white and gold, but that doesn't really tell you very much. In fact, it tells you a hell of a lot more in wine than it does in rum. And one of the things that we do is we do a lot of work on classification. And so that's where single blended comes in, because what we want to do is to communicate something very fundamental about the product. So that's why we talk about single blended instead of talking about an aged rum or a gold rum or whatever. But to that question, which is a really good question, is rum is very much analogous to wine in that sense. The only other thing I would just qualify a little bit carefully there is that you tend to hear things like, rum's a global spirit, or worse, rum doesn't have any rules, and rum is actually, again, very analogous to the other spirits. And let me explain what I mean. Whiskey is a global spirit too. People make whiskey all over the world. Mm-hmm. But you automatically understand that the traditional whiskey producers, what you understand as whiskey, comes from Scotland, comes from America, comes from Japan. If you're really being kind, it comes from Canada as well. So, if someone brings you, a whiskey from the Philippines, you don't sort of go, you'll be like, hang on a minute, is that really whiskey? And rum's the same way, but it's not well appreciated. So, we'll read in Spirits Business, top 10 selling rums in the world, and, something, whatever, from India. And that's no more a rum to us than the whiskeys that they make are whiskeys. But the difference is, because we don't have a major homegrown rum industry in the EU or in America, we're not protected. So all of those illegal whiskeys that are made all over the world are not even allowed to be imported into the EU or the US. But all kind of bizarro rums that us in the traditional rum world would never, ever remotely recognize as being a rum, you know, this flavored neutral spirit. It's the same principle. It's the same identical principle. So, you know, I often say like Barbados and Jamaica are like, you know, Barbados and Jamaica to the rum world are like Scotland and Ireland to the whiskey world.
Yeah, I don't think people understand it as well. The few things that Americans would be exposed to in that world would be something like Tandoy, because isn't now Tandoy the #1 selling product called
you're talking about something
rum?
that's, you know, I mean,
Right.
made with neutral spirit, and you know, even on their website, you know, I mean, sometimes these things get updated, but they, you know, they'll say things like, you know, we add essences or whatever, and so that's why I just qualify that answer that, you know, first, yes, rum is by country, and it's very much like wine. If you really want to understand the rum, you literally have to understand that country's method. But I qualify that by saying sometimes you will cross the line from rum to non-rum, depending on which country. And, you know, how all the rums came with their different diverse methods is a fascinating story. It's a story of the social and economic history of the islands. You know, there tends to be this nonsense about, you know, rum not having any rules, so therefore that's why we were all so creative. It's absolute bullshit, you know. Because first of all, of course, for 300 of the 400 years, we're making a commodity, you know. This whole modern, you know, this whole idea of brands and all that, you know, that's a really sort of modern 20th century development in any spirit. But no, the diversity is driven by our social and economic history. You know, the column still wins in because, you know, it's more efficient, and you know, it's coming in a period of low, very difficult economic times. So you know, many economic factors contribute to the popularity of the column still, not the sort of romantic marketing that we would love to believe. It's driven by much harsher and colder and deliberate decisions. But of course, that's all how we get to where we get to. So, you know, there's nothing bad about that. That's just how, in fact, as I say, the diversity of rum, as I said, the story is beautiful because it's in a way how we ingeniously respond to these economic challenges that gets us to where we are. So
that's not to say that rum has no rules, right?
Well,
I mean, there are lots of rules in rum.
No, correct.
No.
And then, well, what happens is obviously it varies. Again, it varies like just like anywhere else. So, you know, bourbon is a very strict form of whiskey, and, you know, Martinique rum is a very strict form of rum, you know. And then you have something like Jamaica, which is, you know, fairly strict, not quite as strict as Martinique. When I say strict as Martinique, it doesn't mean lesser quality. It just means that Martinique's a lot more specific on what you can and cannot do. And
well, but all of these things ultimately drive through quality and good practices. I mean, is
correct. In other words, every motivation to, it's all about protecting economic value, because once you create something of economic value, someone will try to sell that without having the economic cost. So right. the more successful bourbon is, the more successful Scotch whiskey is, the more you need to protect it, because the more someone will capitalize it. I mean, as long as there's a Louis Vuitton bag, there's a guy who's going to make the fake Louis Vuitton bag. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's the same principle. And what also happens is then you then get to ride on that value. So if you take take a Scotch whiskey brand, or you take a bourbon brand, and you might look at that brand and you think that brand's done really well and is really successful and they've done wonderful marketing. But the cold truth is that they will not be where they are without building on the reputation of the category. I mean, if I, take myself with all my knowledge or whatever experience and send me over to Patagonia and set up still in Patagonia, and I promise you, I don't sell 5% of what I sell now, because I am able to live off the reputation of Barbados rum. So that's your head start. That's your stepping stone. And so the protection is very important, because it preserves that value to the consumer, but it also gives the players in the game an enormous benefit that I think sometimes they don't appreciate, because I think it's very natural to sort of pat your own self on the back and believe all of your success has come, from your own hard work. When reality is that, you're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people that came before you.
And that kind of thinking is what's recently driven your push for that more standardized Barbados rum designation, yeah?
Yes, I mean, we don't like words like standardization, but yes.
Well,
I mean, because what's happening is, and this is particularly, sort of Mount Gay and us,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very interesting example, because obviously Mount Gay and us, on one level we're competitors, but the beauty of being from, a small country and going out there in the world and being in the rum industry and feeling that there is so much more that we can achieve. What happens is then we, when we sort of get out there, we sort of work together. And so one of the things that and this spreads right through the whole islands. I mean, there's a tremendous bond between all the producers of, the Caribbean, Jamaica, St. Lucia, all of us. I mean, because even though we're sort of on one level competitors, on another level, we're sort of ambassadors for our entire category.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a realization that it doesn't matter how much you do with your brand, you're still going to live and die by your category. So, Bangay and us, we have very specific ways in how we want to market our brand, but we also know that it's imperative that we protect the integrity and reputation of Barbados rum, because everything that we do as a brand will be undermined if that name is weakened. So therefore, that's why, there's this massive level of synchronization in terms of what we do together. And of course, the GI is a manifestation of that. And our other partner in that, when I say partner, or simply person who agrees with it, of course, is Nicholas Abbey. They're not big exporters. They're kind of an interesting scenario, because they're not exporters, but they mostly sell to foreigners because it's visitors. So they're they're exporters without the cost of shipping. They're the cleverest model of all. Their customers come to them. But it's the same principle. The customer is not going to go to and visit Nicholas and pick up a bottle of Barbados rum unless Barbados rum has a great reputation. Right. And that's what they do,
Well, I think that people always too often, and it's what you just said, people too often equate standardization with an inhibition of creativity, and that's not the case.
No.
I mean, standardization is just,
and
again,
in fact, what we've done is, in fact, the difference there is a little bit, the two forms of intellectual property, and of course, is not common in the US. The US doesn't use, but there are two forms, and I can sort of illustrate them very well, because Scotch whiskey is a GI, which is what we're trying to create. And Martinique rum is an AOC. So Martinique rum is what they call, the official title is a PDO, Protected Domain of Origin. And so what happens with those, and that's like your wine AOCs, and they will not only be a geographical tie, but they'll have a very strong tie to your geography, and a very strong tie to your methods. So Like, for example, in Barbados, you know, Foursquare is located in St. Philip. So, you know, in theory, we can have a GI for Barbados rum and then an AOC for St. Philip rum. And an AOC for St. Philip rum would then say, you know, the cane has literally got to be grown right here in St. Philip. You know, and we've got to use, you know, this specific method and etc. So you can have these levels. I mean, one of the things that we've done, the three of us that agree on the GI is you know, we really have not made any prescription on the method at all. We focus solely on protecting the economic value. So that's why we've done things like, you know, it's got to be aged in Barbados. Why? Because the economic value is going to be there. And of course, you're tying also the, you know, the aging is a big influence on the nature of the product. So you're tying the nature of the product to the geography. So we've done the aging. We've done, you know, Barbados water, again, tying to the geography. We've done, you know, we don't want any sugar. Why? Because we don't want to affect the integrity of the product. And we want Barbados to be seen as above all those shenanigans. We have not gone down the road at all on methods. So there's a why, and that may turn out to be a mistake in 10 years' time. I know, for example, like some of my bourbon friends, you know, some of my bourbon friends lament, for example, that, you know, you allowed kiln dried staves. And, you know, they lament that, you know, that's in there, you know, and some of them lament, for example, that you don't have a restriction on fermentation time. So some of my bourbon fans say to me that some producers have speeded up fermentation to improve production. So sometimes being too liberal, you will pay a price, because people will always find ingenious ways to cut corners, but sell with the reputation, you know. So you have to be really, really careful. And, you know, as I say, we've done a lot on protecting economic value, but, you know, we haven't really done a lot on the methods. And that's, you know, but that's the risk we've taken. So we've actually done quite the opposite towards standardization. We more or less allow the Barbados GI to make a massive range of styles of rum from there, but we protected the essentials. So what I mean is, you can make this, you know, massive style of rum, everything from cane juice to Dunda to, you know, pot still. You can do all these different things, but you can't age it outside. You can't bottle it outside. So we've sort of protected what we call the essentials. We want you to know, because there's a lot of rum aging outside, so you know, it's going to take a long time to transition, but we want you to know it when you pick up a bottle of Barbados rum, that, you know, the ones that's bottled there. I mean, take Real McCoy. I mean, Real McCoy is a perfect kind of illustration of this. You could buy bulk on age rum, and you can find on American shelves bulk on age rum with color added, says Barbados rum, and you have no idea that left in a tanker. You have no idea that was, you know, bottled in Jacksonville. You have no idea. And so on the shelf, you've got a bottle of Barbados rum, you know, $9.99, and you've got a bottle of, you know, Doherty's Real McCoy 3. And that's 100% aged and bottled in Barbados, and the consumer doesn't know. So with a GI, you know, the US doesn't protect GIs, so we won't be able to chuck the other one off the shelf. But the Real McCoy 3 will carry a certification. And then the beauty of that, and then that's when it then starts to get to the store level. So that's when then, you know, the buyer at Binny's goes, well, hang on a minute, you're offering me a Barbados rum, but I don't see the GI certificate. No, I don't think I'll take that one. And so it's a very long-term process. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's about communicating that and making that distinction. So
yeah, but that doesn't mean that you're stopping anybody in Barbados from making any kind of rum they want, whether they sweeten it, and they just can't call that Barbados rum. Correct. They can still call it rum. They can make anything they want.
They can call it Caribbean. Yeah, as long as they meet the U.S. rules for rum, they can call it rum.
Yeah.
and then they can state an origin or Caribbean origin or whatever. What they can't do is like a trademark. They can't pass it off. So you can't, sort of put, flags of Barbados on it and maps of Barbados and try to fool someone that it's a legit Barbados certified rum. But no, you can still.
So I feel this subject could go on all night, obviously.
Yes.
But at some point, I do want to talk. I want to get your opinion on the breakdown between the three kind of flagship real McCoy rums that we do sell in our stores that are real Barbados rums. So we've got 3-year and 5-year and 12-year. And we talked briefly about the 3 earlier, and you mentioned that it had a higher percentage of that coffee distillate in it, just a little lighter profile. I think anybody listening, try using this in your next kind of classic cocktail, like an old fashioned. It carries great weight and something like that. Where do you move then on the blend from the 5 to the 12 after that 3-year?
Well, just to give you a little bit of the history really explains. I don't know if Bailey went into it. So when Bailey approached me with this project, the reason why we did the project was very simple, was because Bailey said, I want to buy this rum. In other words, I get lots and lots of requests for all kinds of crazy things. One of the most common requests is I have the latest, best formula for spiced rum. My formula is the greatest. Will you help me make it? That's actually slowed down a bit. I used to get inundated with that. And so when Bailey first wrote me, I was very skeptical because I assumed, he's a filmmaker. I was going to get some harebrained idea that he'd come up with. And, it would lead to nothing. And so he kind of stunned me when he said, no. We got to have a classic Barbados rum. Bill McCoy brought rum from Barbados. It's got to be, close to what someone would have drunk back in, the 1920s. And, and the good thing, of course, is that one of our brands was a leading brand at the time. We didn't own it then. But one of their sort of classic rums was Dorley's 5-year-old. And it's back in the day, rum goes through various periods, but certainly most of the 20th century, which wasn't really a good time for rum, wasn't its golden era. 5 years was considered pretty premium. Base rum we got either unaged or 2 years old, and 5 years. So Dorley's 5 was always a very respected and premium. Today we're back now having a golden era of rum, so now we got 10-year-old rum and 12-year-old rums and whatever. So I said to Bailey, right, okay, that's great. So what we'll do is we'll kind of do almost like a brand competitor to Dorley's 5. So it will be, rooted in that, but it's its own little version, because you're creating a brand, but you also have to be very recognizably Barbados. So that's where we started. And it's still a classic. It still can sort of sit in any company. It's one of these sort of flexible. In other words, you could take Real McCoy 5, where people are sitting, sipping rum neat, and you can compete up against anyone with that. You can go and make a beautiful corn and oil with it, or any cocktail. It's that, sort of classic. And then what happened was after that, and we got up and running, we sort of went into two kind of obvious directions, or looks obvious now. One is rum, for better or worse, has a huge volume in cocktails. And so the idea was, let's create a rum that is aimed at cocktails, which are typically white rums, typically unaged rums, but we'll do our own spin on it. So the style of Rum McCoy 3 is not a typical classic sort of Barbados style rum. It really is an evolution, kind of responding to the fact that, when we ship rum abroad, people want to make lovely different drinks with it. And then Real McCoy 12 is kind of the more natural extension. It's a reflection of rum, where rum has been going the last 10 years. So let's say in the last 10 years, rum hadn't been doing well. Chances are there would never have been a Real McCoy 12. But as everyone knows, we've been going on a wonderful renaissance in rum in the last 10, 15 years. And what's happening is the success leads to more to the rest. So if I sell a lot of Real McCoy 5, then that gives you the confidence to put down the stocks to have, a 10-year and a 12-year, and this is how you end up releasing. You don't just decide 10 years ago, oh, I'll have a 14-year-old rum tomorrow. You can't. But it's the initial success that leads to the next step. So if you look at the whole portfolio of Foursquare, it's all about moving up step by step. And so the Real McCoy 12 is a total reflection of where rum is going. And what's been beautifully happening is, of course, is that the premium rum has been growing. So Real McCoy 12 has become increasingly important in the portfolio. And what then that led to was the various limited editions coming off. And that's just a reflection of how the dynamic nature of the rum world is right now. And we're responding. It's, again, it's one of these things people think they love to give you more credit than you deserve. They think, well, you created limited editions, but the limited editions are really a reflection of what the audience is telling you, not the other way around. We don't create a market. People create a market. We respond. So people say to us, I want a higher proof rum. So guess what we do? We come out, something that we couldn't think of when we first did Real McCoy 12. When I say we couldn't think of it was, okay, rum's premium, getting more premium sales, but you're not as ambitious or to go with a higher proof. So you go with 40 easier in here. Remember, you're competing with lots of sugared stuff and whatever. And then as the market matures and you're getting more and more enthusiasts, then you say, hang on a minute, we need to create a limited edition at 46, 92 proof. We have an audience out there that wants that.
It's really cool. Now we touched on earlier about the pot still component of these blends being heavier in flavor, and you have a pretty unique pot still there. Not only do we not see single or double retort pot stills in America for use in pretty much anything, you have a double retort pot still there that is unique in that world too, in the way it functions in the retorts, right? Can you kind of break that down for me personally?
So one of the things that happened was, pot still distilling is very old, obviously in Scotland for single malt and in France for cognac. But in the Caribbean, we evolved our pot still designs, and as a reflection of the fact that we were very powerful. 18th century, late 18th century, golden era of sugar and rum. Exported tremendous amounts, and the people that were very resourceful, very innovative, and but in the Industrial Revolution, which is what drove the creation of the column still, you have this drive for efficiency and proof. So there's a drive to be more efficient and to deliver higher proof. Higher proof gets more money. And so not only was it done in terms of developing the continuous still, there was a myriad of different pot still designs that went through this period. And there's a myriad of different ones that were made. And we also had copperworks out there because we basically had a huge, don't forget, the rum industry is always an adjunct to the sugar industry. So the sugar industry is using tremendous amounts of copper with all the copper boilers, etc. And so there are copperworks out there. We can build these things out there. And we do end up with the most wide array of elaborate stills and designs and different developments. And as far as I can piece it together, the first evolution was to make the double still, which is literally putting two stills together. And then the next evolution was to make the pot and single retort. And then the next evolution was to make the pot and double retort. And then the next evolution was to borrow the technology that made continuous stills feasible. And that's the use of plates and external cooling. And that's where we then added on rectification systems onto these batch stills. So they're still batch stills, but they have column sections that literally is borrowing the technology from a different system, the continuous column system, and applying it to the batch system. So it's an evolution.
Is it fair to say that those retorts essentially act as secondary and tertiary kind of micro distillations
Yeah, no, they do act as secondary and tertiary, and they effectively. Okay, so you got your basic still, and your linarm is a plate, is a refluxing surface.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens with the retorts is you basically have an enhanced refluxing surface. So you have condensation of the vapor coming in and redistillation again.
But it's also a little bit old, because that is the basis for condensation for like an old Philippine still, like they'd use to make mezcal, Mesoamerica and Philippine. That's kind of the same idea, that they just
I'm not so familiar, but yes, in other words.
But they have a cap. In other words, they just have a cold piece that just is affixed to the still that causes condensation.
That they keep
while
cold,
the
and
still
it
doing
makes that
while the
continuous
still's doing
reflux,
its thing.
even though it's
Yes. So if you look at some double stills, there was one, a Cordy still, that was also used in the Caribbean, where the second still carried a cooling system on it to create this extra reflux. So yes, I mean, in this period, there's a wide range of different stills being done. And the double retort really became settled on and widely used. And there's a seminal book that was published by Leonard Ray, family to J. Ray of J. Ray and nephew fame. It's called Practical Sugar Planters, 1855. So it's mainly about sugar, but it's a kind of sort of, quintessential bit of academic work of the period. And so he describes the double retort at length. It's built by a company. At that time, they're built out of Shears out of Bristol, but Shears doesn't seem to have done the design because they never patented it, but they did do some different designs. And it's, and the gist of what Leonard Ray is writing is that, there's nothing superior, because he's writing in 1855, the column still's around, and he's saying, there's nothing superior to the classic double retort system. And so the double retort system seems to be the one system that repelled the competing continuous column still designs. It certainly repelled them up until the late 19th century. And of course, with single malt and that, they stayed 100% with pot stills. But it does seem to be that because of the qualities of that design, it was able to withstand being sort of overrun by the more efficient column stills.
And it can be quite versatile too, depending on how you're treating those retorts and
yes,
what levels you're
correct.
what I was kind of alluding to
and we have a lot
is,
of documentation of people using it in different ways. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. You can more or less run a double retort identically to a simple double distillation system. You can do that if you want. You don't charge your retorts. You can do the classic, wash run, spirit run. So you can do that, or you can do the classic in the classic Caribbean way with the charged retorts. And there are people to this day running their retort stills in different ways. I mean, I'm not obviously fully privy to how Matt Gay do it, but I'm pretty sure they do it different to how I do it. And I'm pretty sure I do it differently to how Hamden does it. I'm pretty sure they are a little bit different to how Worthy Park does it, even though we all have the same principle.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Richard. I don't want to take up too much more of anybody's time here. We could obviously talk about retorts all night. I did want to keep it focused on Bailey's wonderful real McCoy rum. Bailey, we did have one question from somebody was asking if they can hear about any of your plans in Connecticut. I don't know if you want to share with that or not yet.
Yeah, sure. We're putting together a new distillery in Connecticut right now that I've spent so much time badgering Richard and asking questions of him on how to do these various practices that we've started building this new facility, and we're going to experiment with different concepts and different processes. But here's our little double retort still. So if the people listening to this conversation have never seen one of these, that's the double retort pot still made by Forsyth Company in Scotland. And you can see at the top of the still right here, that's the lin arm that Richard's been talking about. And this is the first
the whole thing from the top of the kettle right over, that would be the lin
is the lin arm. But you have the two retorts right there, and then you have the condenser on the far right. And so we're looking at developing processes to do more natural fermentations. Certainly we're doing cultivated yeasts, but with open top washbacks and other things. So it's still in development right now. I still have about 1,000 questions for Richard, which I'm going to pepper you with all the next week. I've been building up a nice long list to keep you busy. But it's really interesting practice to do this, and the goal in the long run is to keep real McCoy the way real McCoy is. So when you try real McCoy and you want to experience the variations, that's all going to come from Richard, and that's going to be Foursquare. And we're not going to take products that are made up here in Connecticut on this new little still and start calling that real McCoy. You're always going to get what you expect from Foursquare, and that's what that brand is all about. So other things that will create maybe things that we end up blending with Richard in the future or doing entirely on our own or whatever, but it's all under the advice and counsel of Mr. Seale and my friend Colin Poppy up in Scotland, who I did a very fun apprenticeship with him in single malt whiskey. So it's been fun to learn from people all this time, and now we've got this new thing developing. So it's in the works. We're not in production yet. We're still building.
Well, stay tuned then on that.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, thanks again, guys, for joining us. Everybody else, thanks for watching tonight.
Thank you.
More than happy to take a break from whiskey and talk about rum for once. So we'll actually be back on Friday talking about tequila with some Los Altos people, right, Brett?
Yeah, Carmen Villarreal from the family that owns San Mateus.
So, Richard, thank you again. Bailey, thank you again. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Richard, we're glad when you came that you weren't on fire. Because we didn't know exactly what it was going to look like when they said that there were. We've been around enough distilleries. We know that the words emergency and distillery generally aren't two things that should be in the same sentence. That's never good.
Well, I didn't say emergency. I said I had a little problem, and I needed to see it through. Yeah, because if I'd been here and they were phoning me, and it would just been a total disaster. So it's like, right. We were sort of tracing the problem through, and I just sort of realized, well, if I get it through, and we did, and I was able to leave, and I've got no calls since then, so that means everything is well,
you can enjoy the rest of your cigar and a nice glass of rum then.
Yes.
Great. Thank you,
everybody. All right, thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you Friday.